Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Mitt Romney is retiring from US politics and he has a message for the old guard. The former presidential contender says it's time for a new generation of political leaders. Romney had both Joe Biden and Donald J. Trump in his sights when he said this, but also a lengthy list of other aging representatives and senators. In this program, we'll be examining the issue of age and politics. With age, they say, comes wisdom. With youth, obviously a certain impetuous nature, I suppose. Good sports teams often work best with a combination of both. So let's meet our panel, which has, I think, a blend of wisdom and energy to spare. They are here on set in the studio. Gérald Olivier, editor of the blog France Amérique, columnist for Atlantico. And is it fair to say, Gérald, that you might in this debate represent the Republican side?
I might.
You might, okay, fair to say.
Good to be here.
Good to see you, sir. On the other side of the studio, we have two guests. I'll introduce them in no order of preference. Ellen Kuntz is Dean of the Finance Department of INSEC, Paris, author of the book Portrait de Veep, l'incroyable histoire de Kamala Harris. You're from the Democrat side, as is the person next to you, Robert Bob Vallier, who is the porte-parole, the spokesperson for Europe for Democrats abroad. Bob, great to see you.
Nice to be.
We'll start the debate here while we wait for another guest to join us. I'll reveal that person when he arrives. And I'm told he has arrived. So, Reed Brody, great to see you, sir. Former New York Assistant Attorney. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Reed, I know you've specialized in legal representation of the victims of dictatorships. So I suspect that you might know a little bit about leaders who are perhaps past their sell-by date, who stay on too long. Can I ask you about that kind of thing? Obviously, I'm thinking the likes of, say, Robert Mugabe, who clearly stayed on beyond his sell-by date, I think, in many ways. You could make a long list. So what are your thoughts on the fact that Mitt Romney has retired and maybe hinted that others his age should do the same?
You know, for me, the retirement of Mitt Romney really is more about the other thing he mentioned, which is the polarization, the extreme polarization of American politics. And I think the fact that we have these two old candidates reflects partly that polarization. I mean, let's remember, Mitt Romney is a mainstream, what we used to call a mainstream Republican, fiscal conservative, supporting the overturning of Roe v. Wade. He was the Republican standard bearer 10 years ago. And now he finds himself totally out of sync with what he calls the demagoguery of the Republican Party. And his going, I don't think the age, to be honest, is really why he was just frustrated. By the hyper-partisanship and the hyper-polarization of American politics. Your listeners will know that in the United States, we really are evolving into more and more two societies. We get different sources of information. We read different newspapers. I'm sure very few Trump voters are watching France 24. It's France 24 today. We don't live.
You'd be surprised, Reed. You'd be surprised. Listen, Reed, I'm going to pause you there and take our report to give a bit more context and let the others have a say. But Reed, thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you very much so far. This report by Catherine Viette. Let's take a look.
Stepping down, Mitt Romney announced his plans to retire when his Senate term is up in 2025. The 76-year-old cited his age as a factor in his decision.
At the end of a second term, I would be in my mid-80s, and I think it's time for guys like me to get out of the way and have people in the next generation step forward.
Romney went one step further and called on Joe Biden and Donald Trump to also make room for younger candidates.
Oh, I think it would be a great thing if both President Biden and former President Trump were to stand aside and let their respective party pick someone in the next generation.
The U.S. president is 80, and should he win re-election, he'd be 86 years old at the end of his second term. By comparison, America's next oldest president, Ronald Reagan, was 77 when he left office. And Biden has had some stumbles, literal when he tripped on stage in June, and figurative when he seemed to ramble during his press conference in Vietnam.
But I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
At 77, Trump is no spring chicken himself, and with his weight, no stranger to health concerns. But the issue isn't only for potential White House residents. Congress, too, has an aging problem. The average age of members of the House of Representatives is 58, while in the Senate it rises to 65, the highest on record. Baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 1964, comprise nearly half of Congress. All of this has voters questioning whether there should be a mandatory retirement age or term limits for politicians.
I think it's kind of disturbing that all our politicians are so old.
In a recent poll by CBS News YouGov, 77% said they want a maximum age limit, and 45% said they felt an appropriate cutoff was age 70. Two other senior senators have made headlines in recent weeks for their health scares. Dianne Feinstein, who at 90 is the oldest member of Congress, has needed to use a wheelchair after her bout with shingles. However, she's announced she's not running for re-election. Mitch McConnell, the 81-year-old Senate Minority Leader, has frozen up at least twice during press conferences, but he's resisted calls to step down.
I'm going to finish my term as leader, and I'm going to finish my Senate term.
And former Democratic Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who cited her age when stepping aside, has now announced plans to run again for Congress next year. She's 83.
Catherine Viette with that report. This isn't about age bashing or saying old people are wrong. It's not about that at all, because I firmly believe that old people have a real wisdom that we can all learn from and bring things from. But is there an issue about being a politician, about the response to public demands, about dealing with the media, about the whole issue of policy that means that you need to be a bit younger? Ellen, can I ask you?
Well, it seems very uncomfortable as a subject because perhaps we're getting younger as people age. You know, when the founding fathers established a minimum age of 35, the life expectancy was somewhere in your 50s,
sure,
if you were lucky. So I'm not sure that age is what it used to be. And we're very unequal in the face of age. But I think what this has happening here is it's more a reflection of how extraordinarily poorly built the system is, and that to be in a position of power, it only is really going to happen when you're extremely old. Just to clarify, one thing that was said earlier about Mr. Romney is that he's not leaving anytime soon. If he, lives out his term, he will be 80 in 2025. So we have these staggered terms with the Senate seats and a 6-year term as opposed to the 4-year term.
So he's saying
House.
he's retiring, but he's going to retire when it all works its way through. So he's not walking out straight away. So
exactly.
They've got the retirement party on hold.
He's got about 2.5 years to go.
There's a CBS YouGov poll revealing 75% of voters want a maximum age limit for elected officials, with 45% of respondents wanting a maximum age limit of 70. There we go. There it is in black and white for you. 70% of voters want maximum age limit for elected officials.
They should want other things.
Indeed, that's what I was thinking too. Gerald, what do you think?
A couple of things. First of all, a slight disagreement. I think Romney is from 47, so he would be 78, even in 2025 at the end of his term.
Okay.
But the thing is, besides age, you have to consider your whether you're competent or not. Intellectual acuity, which may vary according to age. Chuck Grassley, is a senator from Iowa, he's 89.
Sure.
Is a very, very alert kind of guy, much more than some at his age, and some younger men or women are just not as alert as he is. So I don't think it's only a question of age. Mental acuity is
reinforcing
also
what you're saying completely. I've dealt with some MPs in the past in the UK, and they were young people, and they weren't competent at all. I won't name names, but they didn't impress me. So please carry on. Sorry to interrupt. Come.
The third point is career politician. Romney is kind of different in that instance. He's an old-style politician. He had a career in business before he went into politics. He is from 47. He first ran for, I think it was the U.S. Senate in Massachusetts back in 1994. So he was almost in his 50s when he actually entered politics. Contrary to some other politicians that have been there since their 30s, elected back in 1972. For some of them. He ran for the Senate, he lost, he went back to business. He came back to run for governor of Massachusetts. That was back, I think, in 2004. First, he made a stint running for the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City, Utah, his state. Won that governorship in Massachusetts, which also makes him kind of an unusual politician because he was a Republican in a very leftist, very pro-Democrat state, yet he got elected. And then he didn't run for a second term because he ran for president in 2008, didn't get the nomination, and eventually got it in 2012. He lost. And then he decided to run for the Senate in Utah in 2018. So that he didn't have a continuous career as a politician being in office and constantly being re-elected. And I think one of the issues with the American system today, especially Congress, is the power of incumbency. Once you get elected, you get re-elected very, very easily, and it's easy to run because you don't even have to campaign, and you get a cushy job and you can keep it.
It's interesting. Once you're in, you can't get out. And can I say thank you for that very comprehensive run through of Romney's career, because not just like what he did, but dates as well. You don't surprise me at all. Bob, I know you're dying to get in and talk about this one. I mean, Reed Brody was saying that Romney's not gone because he's old, he's gone because he feels completely sidetracked and kicked out and pushed to the side. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, he gave two reasons. One is sort of a health and wellness reason. He's going to be however old he's going to be. His family has a history of men dying of heart failure fairly young, and he wants to spend some quality time with his grandchildren, which is great. I could understand
that, yeah.
Right? But the other reason he gave was the complete disarray of the Republican Party. It's not the Republican Party of his father, George. It's not the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. And it is an egregious insult to even refer to it as the party of Lincoln at this point. It's not even a party. It's a cult. And they pay slavish devotion to the cult leader. Mitt Romney knows that that's not a good style of government. So that's one of the principal reasons he gave for deciding to retire. Increasingly, the Republican Party is anti-democracy. There are countless numbers of them who want to actually dismantle American democracy. There's this 2025 project that you may have heard of that seeks to dismantle all the mechanisms of government should Trump or any other Republican be elected president in 2024. So the situation with the party, his family's party, is no longer tenable. And so he's opting out at a time when he still has a couple of years in which he can be effective, but also then can retire and spend his last years with his family. So.
Indeed. There was a Politico article examining the very changes that engendered by this departure of Mitt Romney. Big problems, according to Politico, for bipartisan policy if the likes of Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema follow suit and follow Romney out the door of the Congress. And as Ellen's pointed out, it won't happen straight away, but it will happen gradually and create more division and create more extremes within Congress.
For sure. Well, the media landscape is extreme, and the electorate follows suit. One thing maybe he didn't mention or didn't articulate with words, but it's clearly there, is that he unfortunately knows well that in this political environment, he would lose a primary in his own state. And there are MAGA Republicans who would beat him in a minute in Utah. And I think that that's probably, given the family history, as you're mentioning, and their real ideology and vision of politics in America. He is still a small d Democrat, and we have to say that more and more, that he believes in the democratic process.
Romney's a small d Democrat. He believes in the democratic process. I just thought I'd clarify that in case I misheard you.
Yes, no, that is what I said.
Quick one from Gerald, then back to Reed Brody. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, Mitt Romney is an old-style Republican, definitely. I'm not sure that the new-style Republicans are anti-democracy. I wouldn't call it like this. Being anti-government is not being anti-democracy. And actually being pro-government these days can be being anti-democracy.
You've done a book on this,
so
haven't you?
we have a book coming on that as well. And we can make it the topic of the debate. Mitt Romney, it's true, came from another era as well. Yeah, it's not his father's Republican Party. It's not his father's America either. He grew up in Michigan. His father was governor of Michigan before or after being president of AMC, American Motors Corporation, when the automobile was, the king industry in the U.S. and the automobile industry was the U.S. This is no longer the case. It's no longer the same America. Yeah.
Quickly, I want to interject one thing there. To say it's not an anti-democratic party at this point is really kind of silly. Half of the Republicans that Mitt Romney refers to in his comments no longer believe in the Constitution. They say say they do not believe in the Constitution. If that's not anti-democratic, I don't know how else you would define it.
I don't know who you're talking about, but I think that
Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert.
They do believe in the Constitution.
They do not.
They're
on record as saying they do not.
They don't believe in their state constitutions. They do not believe in the
their
federal
state constitution, and they don't necessarily believe in contemporary reading of the Constitution.
Wow, so they get to reinterpret 240
No, they don't get
years
to
of
reinterpret.
constitutional
It's those
history.
of today that get to reinterpret.
Oh, when I lose, then it's not okay.
Pause, please. Reed Brody, save me from this battle here in the studio, sir. I know you're listening in at a distance. Great to see you again, Reed. You said that Romney's departure is not about his age. It's about the fact he feels kind of like cut off from everything and pushed to the side. He's hinted that Joe Biden and Donald Trump should do the same and get out because there need to be new people with new ideas. It sounds to me that, from what I'm hearing, there's got to be no new ideas, but there may be new people who just go further and further to the extremes.
Well, I think, what Ellen Kuntz said about Mitt Romney is very, about the primaries, is very important. And Gerard Olivier also talked about how once you're elected, you're going to stay there. And why does this happen? It happens in large part because Americans live apart. They are segregated. There are most Senate seats and almost all of the House seats are safe seats. So that once you are elected, or even if there's an open seat, the key is the primary. And that means that a Republican does not have to appeal to the Democrats, you have to appeal to the primary voters. And so what happens is that you get, that tends to radicalize, in particular, the Republican Party. I mean, we see today, just this week, the Speaker of the House basically felt compelled by far right Republicans to start impeachment proceedings against Joe Biden. And unfortunately, in people like basically everyone who voted to impeach Trump faced a primary. And Mitt Romney is one of the last people who actually voted to impeach Trump, who is still standing, and he's resigning. The others, we know, of course, everybody knows the case of Liz Cheney, who was defeated in a primary. Jeff Flake in Arizona did not want to, said he would not, who voted to impeach Trump, he said he could not and would not speak the language that would be necessary to win in a Republican primary. And so more and more, as primaries replace elections in safe seats, we get people who stay there forever, and we get the age problem. But we also, in particular, get increasing polarization. Half of the Republicans, when we talked about, don't believe that, half of the Republican voters don't believe that Joe Biden was legitimately elected. It's demonstrably false. But yet, those are the people that you need to win over in order to be in Congress or in the Senate in a Republican district. And I think the result is the polarization, in particular on both sides, but particularly in the Republican Party, that we're seeing today.
So that's putting the age up, you say, Reed. That's what's happening. Would you fix an age limit at 70? Just that, I'm plucking that off the top of my head.
I personally would not. I mean, I think that there are other things I would change. I would get rid of the Electoral College. I would impose proportional representation, preference voting. I would do a lot of things to make America more democratic. I think that doing those things, would solve problems more easily than making arbitrary age of 70 or 35 to become president. Obviously, I mean, this is not even as bad as it used to be. It used to be in America, we didn't have these old presidents, but that the entire Congress, particularly the Senate and the House, were run on the basis of seniority. And so the entire Congress in the United States in the 50s and 60s was controlled by white Southern Democratic conservatives. And that, at the time, that was the only one-party place in the United States. And so they would get reelected and reelected and reelected. Now it's spread out a little more, but we still have these problems of people getting reelected. I don't think that age is the problem. I think that the structure is the problem.
Indeed,
and I think
that issue about
that
issue about seniority, Reid, is a very strange one, because I'm reminded of a pop song. The lines went something like this: "Just because he's your elder doesn't mean he's your better. Just because you're older doesn't mean to say you know the best, does it?" Joe, can I ask you two things? I mean, the first one is: do you believe that Biden was actually properly elected, or do you believe the election was stolen? I'm asking you this as a Republican representative.
No, I don't believe the election was stolen.
Thank you.
But I do believe that there was an amount of irregularities which was out of the normal.
Okay, so you got that at least.
Do you have any evidence for that belief?
What about the
Tons
19
of
court
evidence.
cases?
Really? Any of the evidence
I don't
been
have the
adjudicated?
I don't need to have the evidence.
You don't need to
because
have
others
the
it.
evidence.
Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Supreme Court
Said?
said that the way the election was run was unconstitutional according to the Constitution of Wisconsin. It only said it 2 years after the fact, but it did say it. So yeah, there are tons of facts. Okay, and the idea, case in point. I just heard from you that the Republicans don't believe in the Constitution anymore. And I just heard from Reid, and everything else he said was quite actually interesting and very true. He said he doesn't believe in the Electoral College.
Yeah.
He would like to see it eliminated.
He'd like to see
well,
it
I'm so
reformed,
sorry, but the Electoral College is in the Constitution.
Well, also in the Constitution is the voting age that excludes 18-year-olds, and that was amended by a process that is outlined in the Constitution.
There
is a process.
So would you give the
and
vote
if you
then?
eliminate the
There is a
Electoral College,
process
you
in
eliminate the
Yes,
place
I
of
would,
states.
because the Electoral College is a
Then it
racist
would no longer be the
institution that was
US. Then it would
designed
no
to
longer be the
guarantee
United States
the
of America. So you're
representation
against
of
the United States of America.
slaveholders
No,
from
the question is
initial
extremely
period
important.
of the United States.
The Electoral
There
College
are
is part of
lots
the
of
electoral
mechanisms
process,
that one can
and
motivate
to me is the most important
reform the
issue.
Constitution. I can
Because
talk
there
over
are-
as you as much
there
as you can talk
yeah.
over me. It's
I
fine. We
started
can
you
just
today.
do it.
Team,
I started
time
you
out,
today,
team,
so I'll
time
keep
out,
on
please.
talking.
Time out, please. Ellen, quick comment,
Yeah.
then a
There
soundbite
are
from Mitt Romney.
proposals on the table specifically for this problem of the Electoral College.
It's not a problem.
No, there are specifically proposals that are not for the time we're living in now. They're looking out. I know that Andrew Yang put one forward when he was a candidate. Our current director of Department of Transportation, fellow, I forget his name, Pete Buttigieg, they both put forth proposals for it to be amended and therefore becomes the Constitution. It takes a really long process. So you're saying it's in the Constitution, so therefore you're for or against. No,
That's
it's in
always
the
how it's been
Constitution.
done.
Right. So that's why we have an amendment process. There have been few amendments that have made it through this complex process that require a lot of support, but it's totally possible. That's why ladies like me can vote, because it had to be amended by the Constitution. That's why I'm not working in a field right
That
now,
was not
because
specific to
slavery
the
was
US.
amended out
It
of
was
the
specific
Constitution.
all over the place.
I'm sorry?
It's the women's vote was not a specifically American issue. It was the world
Yeah,
issue.
but we're
a
talking about
European issue, a
American
Western
politics.
issue.
We're talking about American
No,
democracy
the point
here.
Is, the very important point when you understand the U.S., the U.S. was founded by 13 states that got together and eventually wrote this constitution and expanded across the continent, and today gather 50 states. The voice of the state is as important as the voice of the people, regardless of the population of the state.
That's why
and
we
that's
have a
why the Electoral
bicameral
College
house with a
is
federal
in the
system.
Constitution.
And that's why
Houses
you
of
guys,
states
I
actually,
know
you're
that
very lucky.
it
representation in
upsets
the Senate.
Democrats
No,
because
Gerald.
people are in the
Representation
cities
in the
that you
House.
control
Gerald,
through
you
your
should know better.
government,
That's
and
why-
you want to be able to rule without the other part of America.
You know, you guys are so lucky. You have a North and South Dakota. You have more reps than you should have. You have a North and South Carolina. You have more reps than you should have. The day that, you know, Washington, D.C. becomes a state, there's no more Republican Party.
There are more Americans living
you
in
know
France
that.
than there are in North Dakota.
Team, pause. Let's,
maybe. I don't
pause,
know.
please.
For sure, we
Let's
know
hear
the
next.
truth.
Let's hear now from Mitt Romney, the man who's decided he's going to
hear
retire
from Mitt
at the grand old age of 76. Let's hear his words.
Yes, thank you.
There's no question but that the Republican Party today is in the shadow of Donald Trump. He is the leader of the greatest portion of the Republican Party. It's a populist, I believe, demagogue portion of the party. Look, I represent a small wing of the party, if you will. I call it the wise wing of the Republican Party. And I don't believe we're going away. I think ultimately we'll see a resurgence and come back into leadership of the party.
Mitt Romney pulling no punches there. Reid Brody, save me again. Come back in and give us a voice of reason on this one, please.
Sure.
What would you make of what Romney was saying there, talking about demagoguery? Really, it's not the party that it was.
Well, I think this is absolutely true. I mean, you have a leadership, you know, that is just driving to the right. Most people, as I said before, most Republicans believe that the election was stolen, something that is demonstrably untrue. And you have the power has shifted to the very far right in the Republican Party. I mean, we see the impeachment against Joe Biden basically being driven by people who 10 years ago would have been considered the extreme fringe, people like Matt Gaetz and the so-called Freedom Caucus. And unfortunately, because of this partisanship, the old liberal Republicans, the Rockefellers, the Jacob Javits. I'm reading a book right now about Robert Caro's biography of Lyndon Johnson, in which Republicans, I'm not harking back to the good old days, but Republicans and Democrats, when President Biden went to Florida to look at the hurricane damage, Ron DeSantis would not accompany him. Then this is going, there are certain things that should bridge the partisan divide, and yet we have a system now where both sides believe that the other side is acting in bad faith, that the policies, environmental policies by Democrats, the real purpose is to destroy the workers in coal and oil, and there is very little working across the aisle, and Mitt Romney, conservative Republican, was somebody who worked across the aisle, who worked with Democrats when he felt it was in the country's interest. I don't always or don't even usually agree with him, but you had a certain bipartisanship, which is now considered traitorous. When I was watching the House Speaker yesterday, McCarthy, talk about why he was bringing the impeachment vote, it looked like he was forcing the words out. Basically, every time a law comes up now, Congress is the government is being held hostage. Every 3 or 6 months, we're facing shutdowns because the extreme right is holding its breath, until more concessions are made. And I think there's a total breakdown here of American politics, unfortunately.
If I may,
Ellen, go ahead. Thank you, Reid.
Really interesting what he just said.
Always interesting,
the lack of decorum, the lack of decency. I think that was supposed to be the behavior of old guard senators and Republicans. The ability to work across the aisle was evidence that they had some political maturity and also made enough political friends to be able to work with them. Recently the U.S. government debt was just a little bit downgraded by one of the credit rating agencies, and they frequently mention this type of behavior as a risk for the U.S. government, that it has become dysfunctional in a place where laws need to be voted on behalf of citizens, and it's really not happening for reasons that are totally
doesn't
political.
impress the likes of Moody's, who do the ratings, that
Absolutely.
kind of thing.
It's part of the process of being. It can't just be a democracy. It has to be a functioning democracy.
So we've established, I think, that it's nothing to do with age. I think that's one thing. Let's get that one out of the way. Yeah. So Biden's age, Trump's age, anybody's age, Nancy Pelosi's age, that doesn't matter.
Sure. And it can't matter because in the age of DEI, diversity and equity and inclusion, we have to include age. Yeah. Otherwise, we're cherry picking.
Would you give
DEI.
younger people the vote, say, bring the voting age down? Because I know they talked about that in the UK a while back, and that would have given the Labour Party a massive victory, apparently. But, that's all bygones. Would you, Gerald, bring the voting age down?
Personally, not.
16 years old?
No, not at all. I'd rather bring it up.
At 16, you knew how you wanted to vote. I knew I wanted to vote.
No, at 16,
that's what he just said. I don't want to bring it down. I want to exclude people by raising it. I want to exclude voters who are going to vote for Democrats.
Thing, aren't we? We're back to the age thing.
It has nothing to do with party affiliation. It has to do with maturity. We know you find that teenage years keep going longer and longer and longer. Yeah. Well, let me finish for once, if you please. If you please would respect that. Okay. We find that young people are young, I say, in their head longer and longer. It takes. Voting is important.
Some would say
it's true that
some would say that a gentleman of your age and my age would say that about young people.
Yeah. Some would say that. Some would also ask the question of whether or not an 18-year-old is sufficiently mature to have a gun.
Yeah, okay.
That's not the same issue.
Oh, no, it's not the same issue. It's maturity. You just said it was a matter of maturity. Children, 18-year-olds are too young to vote, but they're sufficiently mature to shoot guns at people.
I did not
That's
say
the
that.
implication of what you said.
No,
Bob,
it's
allow him
not
to
the
develop it. Allow him to develop
implication.
him.
It's not the implication.
Gerald, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. So the point is made. 18 is an age of responsibility, and it's a fine age for voting. I see no reason to bring it down.
Let me put this. Let me put this to. Excuse me for stopping. Let me put it to Reed Brody. Reed Brody, international jurist. You're a man who's. I mean, my respect for you is immense, Reed. What would you do with the voting age? Would you bring it down? Would you keep it the same? What would you do?
No, I think 18. I mean, when I was one of the first 18-year-old voters, and in fact, we
You're
were
not
talking
that
about
old,
amendments.
Reed. You're not that old. Stop it.
It's the last. It was almost 40 years ago. It was the last substantive amendment to the American Constitution, precisely because of the gridlock that takes over. No, I would leave it at 18. I think it's. But I would raise the age for some other things, as your guest said.
Reed Brody there, keeping the voting age at the same, but thinking about other things. I think Bobby's hinting at guns and that kind of thing. And clearly, you feel that is something that should be changed utterly.
The age for gun
ownership? Or guns
I
at
think
all.
there needs to be all sorts of safeguards put in place with regard to guns. We're not going to get rid of them. There are more guns in the United States than there are citizens. We're not going to get rid of them, and we're not going to control them. This idea that many Republicans propagate that we're coming to get your guns is just not feasible. There's too many of them. But subjecting guns and gun ownership to various forms of regulation is a perfectly feasible policy that's absolutely consistent with the Second Amendment.
Because I was going to say, a lot of Republicans say that the Second Amendment is there to back up, the right to bear arms. Okay. Is there to back up the First Amendment. I've always thought that was a bit kind of a curious argument.
That'd be great if that were the case, but they focus on the Second Amendment and then they want to limit the First Amendment. Yeah. So if you can limit one, you can limit the other.
Sure. Okay, let's go back to this idea of age, because I'm keen to really keep exploring this one, because obviously we have Biden, who is 80, and we have Donald Trump, who's in his late 70s, we have Nancy Pelosi, who's... It's rude to talk about a lady's age, but she's getting on.
She's 81.
Well. Thank you very much indeed,
And she
Gerald.
left on her own at 80.
And she's going to run again.
Citing her age.
She just said she's going to run again.
She's going to run again.
And she's going to win again.
And the
Joe Biden.
Republican who was frozen, McConnell.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell.
I mean, that was an incredibly sad situation. And, whether you agree with his politics or not, it's still extremely sad to see someone in that situation.
It's not age. It's your health.
Sorry, Ellen, you said not sure he sees it that way.
No, I don't think he sees it that way at all.
McConnell. No.
Unfortunately, just like Dianne Feinstein, who held up, judicial nominations. I'm from California originally. I was sorry and sad to see that. I'm sorry that there's not a better off-ramp for these politicians. Maybe that's something that's missing. We have an excellent off-ramp for being an ex-president. You get your presidential library, you get to do a book tour, somebody's going to write your biography. They know what's waiting. Maybe in the congressional setting, less so, and there's a deep fear about, leaving their job. They kind of don't know what to do with themselves.
If I may?
Go ahead, please.
I think it's actually a very, very good question, is why do politicians hang on so tight to power?
Yeah.
You wonder what they find in politics besides personal satisfaction that make them want to carry on.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney is a millionaire, multi-millionaire. He didn't have to go into politics to become a millionaire.
Yeah.
Unlike quite a few politicians of the latest generation, including Nancy Pelosi and others. So it takes you to wonder what advantages there are in the system, and what the fact of what they know and when they know it because of what's happening in Congress, and how it can help them make a lot of money on the market. And
What
why
are you
they wouldn't want
implying,
to give
Gerald?
that up.
What are
We
you
could understand
implying
that.
here, sir?
Oh, I'm implying that
Insider
politicians-
dealing?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Glory
Well,
be.
Maybe there are some politicians who have, you called them career politicians earlier, Gerard. There are some politicians who've been in politics for the better part of their lifetime, like the current president of the United States, out of a sense of service to the country and to his fellow citizens. He has a list of things that he wants to accomplish. He already has a very long list of very positive things that he has accomplished, and the work is not done yet. So many politicians who stick around because they have the common good, the public good at the forefront of their mind, and they're well positioned to be able to accomplish the kinds of goals that the United States of America needs to accomplish in order to be a healthy, functioning, rich democracy.
Yeah, and Biden impeached over some kind of dealings in Ukraine, and clearly this was something that Ukraine
I wouldn't even call it that.
investigated and said there's nothing to be questioned.
Trump calls Marjorie Taylor Greene and says, you got to get on the speaker about this impeachment thing. The speaker cannot hold his coalition together. No. He's got 4 votes, a 4-vote margin. And several different factions competing. And so in order to shut up the Freedom Caucus, he says, okay, go ahead and open an impeachment inquiry. It's not a procedure yet. It's an inquiry. And that will buy him time, basically, to manage the other factions within the caucus. And the speaker knows that there is no way that the House is going to vote on those impeachment articles should ever any be produced. So that's all just smoke. Right? Yeah. At the instigation of the cult leader, so that in a potential matchup again between Trump and Biden in a year and a half, Trump could say, oh, look, he was impeached too. Well, okay, maybe, but he wasn't indicted 4 times, was he? So
that's not the story, if I may.
It's a great story.
It's a big part of the story.
It's a great story.
It's going to be a very, very big story. Joe Biden was once vice president. From 2009 to 2017, okay? And he took his son, Hunter, on his official visits abroad. And every time he went abroad and he came back, the son had a business deal with some partner abroad. And the son made money. And then the son told everyone that they had to give some of that money to his dad. And that was known. And there were people in the Obama administration. There were ambassadors abroad who sent memorandums, who sent emails, who said, this is not right. You should look into it. And nobody dared, because nobody wanted to come across Joe Biden vice president. That is the issue.
That is the issue.
That is the issue. And that's what I know, because there is business in Jared Kushner. Trump is an entrepreneur.
So I beg your pardon. No. You're saying, you know what?
No,
there are Nepo babies with $1 million no-show jobs.
That's the thing. What is the business? That's the whole issue.
So Trump goes to Saudi Arabia and makes a deal with MBS, and then Jared Kushner gets $2 billion from Saudi Arabia. There's no coincidence there, is there? Nobody's calling for an investigation of that, are they? If they want to treat things even-handedly, if they want to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop, of which there is no evidence, then let's go ahead and take a look at Jared Kushner's business deals for which there is abundant evidence.
That's what's going to happen, at least, and I think that's the very good thing about the impeachment. It's not an impeachment, it's only an inquiry, by the way.
So the request from Donald Trump to Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, to push things forward, to bring something out, that was clearly an embarrassment for Trump. It was proven from that investigation for Ukraine that there was nothing to...
Wasn't he impeached for that as well?
Yeah,
he was impeached for that.
Why? Because
I'm just reporting facts as we saw it. And you disagree, I can see, because obviously you disagree with that, and you disagree with the election result too. So there we go. Reed Brody, come back, please. We need you. Reed Brody, international jurist, voice of reason. Always great to see you, sir. I mean, we don't care about the age of Biden or Trump now. I think we've established that. We don't care how old our politicians...
Well, we do, I think.
Oh, go ahead then. Go on. Go on, sir. You tell us.
No. I mean, I think it's appropriate that they run, but I do think one should question. I think, unfortunately, a great handicap for Joe Biden is his age, as it is for Trump. I just don't think we should legislate these things. I think Mitt Romney, however, is right. Most Americans don't want to see this choice. And I think that the Democrats have decided that, a bruising primary would be, prejudicial to their chances. So they remember Ted Kennedy going up against Jimmy Carter. And they basically, the word has come down that nobody goes up against Biden. And on the Republicans, there's no such word, but Trump is obviously going to be the Republican candidate. So despite what Americans actually want and what would seem to be reasonable, these are the two candidates.
If I may.
Ellen, quickly, go on.
Yeah, really quickly. I think it's important to remember that.
Take your time.
I think it was
We'll
really
steal time
important to
for you.
remember that when Joe Biden was elected, we were in the middle of a pandemic, and everything was Zoomed and everything was online, and he actually didn't physically have to go to 50 states. And I would be a bit worried about any 80-year-old. I mean, if anybody who knows any 80-year-olds, you'd be worried about them, going to the supermarket, let alone trying to do the mandatory 50-state tour. Indeed. So it's really curious to me that people see Joe Biden as old and somehow Donald Trump is young, but okay, I guess these things are going to play themselves out.
Gerald.
We're going back to the beginning. It's not the age, it's his mental and physical abilities. Everybody can see that Biden is partly senile. I'm sorry.
But doesn't Trump say the same thing?
No, you need to be a doctor to say that, please,
okay,
sir.
fine.
He's not senile.
He stumbles.
You point to things like
he mistakes his wife for his sisters.
He's been verbally stumbling all of his life because he's a stutterer. He's always been a stutterer.
And everything is fine.
And he does not talk to dead people. Stop making absurd charges. Stop.
Don't make absurd charges.
You're
I don't
making
have to.
ridiculous
All you have
claims.
to do
Just
is
stop.
follow him, listen to him, and look at him.
But look at the video from 40 years ago. It was the same.
Same thing. He's been making gaffes for
bed.
40 years. They're even called a Biden gaffe. He fell down the steps.
much worse
Whoop-de-doo.
than that.
So
It used
did
to be
Trump.
called the Biden
So did
gaffe.
Gerald Ford.
No,
Everybody
they used
falls
to be
down
called
steps.
that.
I fell off a bike last
No,
night.
it's worse than that,
Big
and you
deal.
know it. And you know it.
Yeah,
It
you
used to
know
be
it
that.
too. You're making absolutely
I am
ridiculous
not.
assertions without
don't
any
need to,
evidence, as you did with regard
Joe
to the election.
Biden does it just by himself, just fine.
He
He's
is
one of
just
the most
fine.
successful
He's up at 6
politicians.
o'clock every morning. He's in the office every morning, conducting the nation's
It's not a
business.
joke for us. We're Americans,
governing.
and we love our
He's
country.
governing.
And he doesn't love the
Trump was
country.
not up at the crack
Trump does
of dawn.
not love the country.
Trump was
No,
up
he
at
was
10
writing
o'clock,
tweets.
and he was writing tweets and calling into Fox News
Never
and
mind.
eating Big Macs.
If
So,
Playing
you
golf.
know,
That's
if
what
you
you
want
believe.
Playing
Good
golf
for
as
you.
well, yeah?
playing golf as well. Biden's not out playing golf. He is out riding a bike, and guess what? He fell
No
off a bike.
president has
Big
taken
deal.
as many days of vacation as Joe Biden.
Time out, because
That's also
time
a lie.
time is up, everybody.
Stop
Thank you very
lying.
much indeed
I'm
for
not
joining
lying.
us.
Yes, you
That's
are
the fact
on
of his
that one, yes.
appointment.
Thank you all for joining us. Time is up. Gerald Olivier, editor of the blog France Amérique, columnist for Atlantico. Thank you, sir. Thank you
for
to
the
Ellen
invitation.
Kuntz of the INSEC and author of Portrait de Vie, L'incroyable histoire de Kamala Harris. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Bob Vallier, who's the porte-parole or spokesperson of Democrats Abroad. And thank you to the voice of reason, Reed Brody, joining us from Barcelona. Reed, I couldn't have got through this without you. Thank you very much indeed for your voice of reason, your incisive ability to analyse things, and that sense of decorum and
Thank you very
gravitas
much,
that you
Mark.
brought to this debate. Thank you so very much indeed. So thanks to all. Thanks to you for watching. Stay with us. More to come here on France 24.